because no one really grows up thinking, oh, I want to be a council tax inspector. That was never my dream job. When I launched my shop, I got a sale that very first day. So that was a real boost to the system. I never thought that was something I could actually do. I feel they really took me on a magical adventure that I didn't know was going to happen, and I just loved that.
Hi, I'm Claire, founder of Open Stage Arts drama and singing classes for adults. For this podcast, I chat with people who have found or refound their creativity as adults. We'll explore their childhood experiences of the arts, discuss how they came to the artistic practices they now love, and consider the barriers they may have experienced between the two. We'll also explore what it is that people value and gain from their newfound artistic pursuits, and how their creative lives enrich their practical, necessary, everyday lives. For this episode, I'm speaking with Lynsey Warren, owner and creator at Raindrop Crafts, handmade business coach and virtual craft fair organiser. As a youngster, Lynsey loved art class at school and doing craft activities at home, but didn't know at the time that such activities could become a source of income. After working in offices and becoming a youth worker, Lynsey found the craft that would change everything for her. Let's find out more. Hi Lynsey.
Hi Claire.
You have tried a number of creative, crafty activities over the years. What is the one that has stuck and led you to found your own handmade business?
Oh Claire, that is a really interesting story actually, because I have done many crafts over the years. I was a card maker for a lot of years, but I'd been looking for a craft business idea for a long time. And I kept looking and looking for the perfect thing. And I needed something that was financially viable, that I loved to make. And I kept trying all sorts of different things. And then one day I went round a friend's house and I saw this beautiful fairy hanging on a dresser. And I came home and thought, I want to have a go at making those. Not at that point with thinking it would be a business, but I absolutely loved it. And being a crafter, I don't always look at things and think I want to buy it. I automatically think, how can I make it? So after lots of research, I made my first fairy. Was really pleased, and then I started giving them as gifts to my daughter's friends, because she was only about 8 at the time, and they went down really well. And after about 6 months, I decided then that I would go for it and set up my own handmade business.
Wow! Oh, that's so exciting. I can't wait to hear more about that. Let's go back to your childhood. What were your artistic experiences like as a youngster?
Well, obviously, we didn't have as many. We didn't have the internet and all millions of TV channels and all of that when I was young. So we had to kind of make our own fun a lot more. So I think in a lot of ways that was a good thing for me, because I spent hours drawing, colouring, and making. My favourite television program was Blue Peter, because they always used to do craft projects on there, and I used to absolutely love it. I used to craze my mum for the empty washing up liquid bottles, because for some reason so many of their projects always seemed to want one of those, and my mum could never use up the washing up liquid quick enough for me. So that was really sort of one of my earliest memories. And I always remember I made these writing sets for my granddad. They were a project on Blue Peter, and they were actually washing powder boxes covered in wrapping paper. But my mum took me out and we bought some writing paper to go in them, so I could give them as Christmas gifts. Now that wasn't the normal thing, the everyday thing that I really got to do. So I can remember just being so proud of giving these sets to my granddad at Christmas. I thought it was the best thing ever. So Blue Peter definitely was a big inspiration to me. And then I kind of had family around me. My dad was very much into photography, and he spent hours doing photography. One of my nans was very crafty, and she was into knitting, had a knitting machine, and she taught me how to knit and make little tassels and pom-poms and all those kind of things. And then art at high school was just the best lesson ever. If I could have just spent every day in the art class, that would have been me. So yeah, so that was really a lot of the background of my sort of crafty journey, really.
Oh, it sounds wonderful. It sounds such fun. What did you do after school?
So it's funny actually because art was absolutely my passion, and I took an art A level at college, and I actually ended up dropping it after a year. I look back with hindsight and I wish in some ways I'd have tried sticking it out. But what had happened was a year after doing it, I just had all these unfinished pieces of work, and quite frustrated in the way that the art teacher, when I really needed help, never seemed to be there. And there was a lot of sort of drawing portraits and things like that. And I think probably I was quite out of my comfort zone with it quite a lot. So I did drop it after a year, which was a shame. If I could have gone back and talked to my teenage self now, I would have probably said to do something different. But, that was the decision I made at the time. So after that, I kind of went off. I worked in an office. So I've done all various kinds of jobs, debt collecting for the DSS, a council tax inspector, youth work, then I had a family. When I gave up that A level art, there was always something missing. There was a part of me that always felt I was searching for something and I never really knew what it was. I think if you're creative, it feels a little bit like an itch that has to be scratched, and I didn't know what to do really. So yeah, that's a little bit about sort of after school really.
Yeah. So the jobs, did you kind of fall into them? Was there a plan?
Well, I think the thing was sort of when I grew up in the 80s and I went to college like in the early 1990s, jobs in art they weren't available, or didn't feel like they were available like they were now. Or if they did exist, I certainly didn't know about them. Obviously, we didn't have the internet and all that kind of thing, did we? So I done the art A level while I started it, and along with the secretarial course. So the idea was that I was going to go and work in an office, and that's what I did. The debt collection, that was all office based. I wasn't going out and knocking on people's doors. When I became a council tax inspector, that was knocking on people's doors, but it was kind of like an unexpected route, shall we say, because no one really grows up thinking, oh, I want to be a council tax inspector. That was never my dream job. But it taught me a lot of life skills, and I earned a decent wage. And at the time, I look back now, and it was all just part of my journey, really.
Yeah. Oh, that's a very good way to look at it. So while you're doing these very uncreative jobs, and you've mentioned that you felt that there was something missing, how did you approach trying to scratch that creative itch? Or did you do that?
I think my husband, he was quite good in a lot of ways, because when I got with him in my 20s, he had hobbies. And so he kind of encouraged me, really. I mean, I used to do a little bit of cross stitch, but it didn't fulfill me creatively. And then I'd done a degree, and while I was doing it, I kept seeing these card making magazines. They were sort of kept appearing in the shops, and I said to myself, right, when I've done this degree, I'm gonna go and buy one of these magazines.
What were you doing the degree in?
Oh, that was working with young people, because I'd kind of started to change careers then, because I'd done part-time youth work, and then I went into a career working with young people. That was what my degree was in. Again, nothing art related whatsoever. So yeah, so I started doing that. I went and bought one of these craft magazines that I'd been looking at for so long. So I did get a magazine, but actually, even just before that happened, it was quite funny because my mum-in-law invited me along to this, of all things, a WI craft day. I went along and I made these decoupage cards, and they were the first sort of cards I ever made. Well, I thought they were absolutely marvelous. Looking back now, I don't think they were so marvelous, but at the time, I thought they were the best thing ever. So when I got my card making magazines and I started out trying all sorts of techniques, I did love the card making for a long, long time. But for me, I really wanted my own handmade craft business. And so the card making was never really going to be that with the type of cards I personally make. Because I could take 2 or 3 hours making them, and I was never going to charge more than sort of £3 or £4 for them. So that was never going to be a viable business. So that was really why I kept carrying on looking, really.
Yeah. You've mentioned going to your friend's house and seeing this fairy. So from that, how did you start making your own?
Well, I came home and started to research, found videos that showed how to make them. A lot of them were American, so I had to trying to buy the supplies in the UK wasn't easy, and I spent loads of money buying all the wrong stuff. But in the end, I got the right supplies. Me and my daughter actually made the first fairy together. She was 8 at the time, and she was really excited to have a go. I mean, she needed a little bit of help, but yeah, we both sat and made a fairy, and it was. I think even that first fairy I made, this is going to sound really corny, but it was love at first make, because it was like a little bit of magic had happened. I had these real simple supplies like wire and a wooden bead for the head and this embroidery thread to cover the wire and to make the hair. And it really was like a little bit of magic had happened. You know, at the end, there was this beautiful little fairy. I mean, she wasn't perfect, but I still loved her. I look back on that memory of making that first fairy, and just there was just something so special about it.
Oh, that's brilliant. I love sharing my guests' stories with you, but podcasting isn't cheap. There are hosting fees and software costs, tech to buy, and time to invest in planning and editing to make sure the guests sound great and listeners hear the best content. If you would like to financially support Creativity Found, please visit ko-fi.com/creativityfoundpodcast. Tell me a bit more about the materials and how you design your own fairy characters.
So that's a good question, Claire. So, I mean, the materials involved, it's wire for the body, and then a wooden bead, as I've mentioned, for the head, and embroidery thread, you cover the wire and things like that. And I think what kind of happened for me, I started off making some quite simple, just flower fairies. So skirts were made out of silk flowers and things like that. But then as the years have gone on, I've just developed it. And actually, some of my card making skills have come into play with different things, like when I've made wings and paper flowers that I decorated the fairies with. They were all things that I was using in my other paper crafting. If I hadn't have done the card making, the fairies might not have turned out how I'd wanted. I just get the inspiration comes from all over, really, from different fabrics I've got through the seasons. I've just been busy making some autumn fairies to release. Yeah, so that's really a little bit about how I come up with designs. It's just a mixture, really.
Yeah, it is really creative in that sense, then, that you can, as I say, create these characters and be inspired by various things around you. Let's move on to the turning this lovely activity into a business, which you said is something you always wanted to do. But how did you actually do it and make it start to earn you some money where the card making wasn't doing, for example?
Yeah, so it did take about 6 months of just practicing making the fairies, giving them as gifts and getting really nice responses. And in a way, I did put it off. I mean, I could have probably started it before, but I am the sort of person, once I'm in doing something, I'm all in. So I knew it was going to be time consuming, and so I needed to wait till the right time, really. So I kind of began in the January. I think that was back in 2017 now. And I set up an Etsy shop, and I'd done those kind of things before. I'd sold a few little cards and stuff like that. So, I had a little bit of an idea of what I was going to do and things like that. And one thing that really helped was I'd had a card making blog for years. So I was friends with lots of crafters, and I'd been involved in the crafting industry. So I set up my Etsy shop, and I'd already got like a good Instagram following just on a personal account. So when I started that business, in some ways it wasn't like starting from scratch, because I probably had about 1,500 followers on Instagram by this time, just like I say, on a personal account. I had friends on Facebook that were crafters, and when I launched my shop, I got a sale that very first day. So that was a real boost to the system. I started expanding my range, making different fairies, these little peg bunny dolls, all sorts of things, and it did really take off. It was a good journey, really.
Yeah, and you started going to the craft fairs. Tell me about those experiences and how you felt on a personal level going out there in front of all the people.
The one thing that really helped me with that was I worked with a business coach, because sort of after 6 months, I was getting lots of sales, but I wasn't really making all that much profit. I wasn't charging nowhere near enough. And my business coach said to me about having a stand at Kirsty Allsop's Handmade Fair. Now, I'd been to that fair as a visit, and I suppose it was one of those things in the back of my mind. I always like walked around thinking I'd love to have a stand here. But at the same time, I never thought that was something I could actually do, And when she said to me about it, I was like, what, me? She believed in me so much that it really helped me believe in myself too. And so I did have a stand at Kirsty Allsop's Handmade Fair. I think that was about 2018. And that was that was so scary. I mean, I live in a tiny little village in Norfolk, and there I was going off to Hampton Court Palace with a van packed up of stock, staying in a hotel in that part of London, completely out of my norm. But I always like to think that my fairies have taken me on a big adventure. And that fair was really one of them. So I done that fair and I loved it. It was such a good experience. I done the Ideal Home Christmas show, but then also I've done little tiny shows. I've done indoor shows, outdoor shows. I've kind of done a whole range, a mixture of them. I feel like I've learned so much from all those experiences.
Are you good at talking to the customer at the shows?
Well, I think when I went to Kirsty Allsop's Handmade Fair, my sister came and a friend, and we wore 1950s style vintage dresses with the big petticoats, and kind of we looked a bit like some of the fairies that I made, but without the wings. And that was actually a real talking point. People would just automatically talk to us and tell us how lovely we looked and all of that. So actually, the dress kind of attracted people into the store when I kind of done that without really knowing that was going to happen, because it was a talking point. So but yeah, and it was lovely just meeting so many lovely people. It was, yeah, I am quite a people person, and I loved the chance to meet the people and see who was buying my stuff. And I even had one man, I did have to square up a little bit, because he looked at one of the fairy skirts and I was like, what are you doing? So I was just seeing how they was made, and I was quite offended that he'd looked at one of my fairy skirts.
Quite right, too. That's very personal.
Yeah. Luckily, they all have their pants on, so it's absolutely fine. But even so.
Oh, I hadn't even thought of such a thing. That's brilliant. You mentioned about adventure, and I know that you said that your fairies have taken you on a journey. What do you mean?
So I started off sort of with my own handmade business with my fairies, but then I had coaching, and then I started doing well for my business, and I started getting other people say to me, well, how are you growing your Instagram following? How are you growing your business? And I suppose because I'd got a background as well of working with young people, always been I love working with people. It kind of sparked some ideas to think, well, maybe I could coach other people, maybe I can help other people with their businesses, because I love the making and all that side of things. But for me, I still wanted that interaction with people too. So I trained as a coach. I'd done a coaching course at college, and I absolutely loved it, as well as being creative. That was just the best course I ever done. I had an amazing tutor who was so supportive, and luckily I'm still in touch with her now. And that, I suppose that really sparked a whole new side of my business then, because I then became a business coach myself to handmade business owners. I now also run virtual craft fairs on Instagram. I have my own podcast, well, not my own, with the lovely co-host Anna, who's an Etsy expert. And I look back and I think, goodness, this all happened from making those fairies. Had I not have pursued that creative passion, I probably wouldn't have been on this journey now. So I do very much feel it has been a journey with my fairies. I feel they really took me on a magical adventure that I didn't know was going to happen, and I just love that.
Yeah. Oh, that's wonderful. Tell me more about the handmade craft fair on Instagram.
So that's been a really great place for me to build a community of makers on Instagram. And I'm really passionate about the page. So I kind of promote people on there for free. I have sort of sharing posts. I feel like it's a place people come together, they tag their friends and they support each other via my page. So I feel that's a really nice thing to do. And then, I run virtual craft fairs. Tend to do them once a month, and people pay a small fee to have a virtual stall. They get lots of support with that. They have like a carousel post with up to 10 photos on, and they share information about their products. But it is a lot more than that. There's training involved. There's lots of little mini trainings. They get a Zoom Q&A with me, all about taking part in the fair. And one of the things that's proved really popular is that people taking part in the fair, I put them in little Instagram teams of sort of 4 or 5, and they've worked so well because the idea is that everyone in that little team supports each other during the fair and the run up to the fair, sharing on their stories, commenting and things like that. And because they're just small groups, a lot of those crafters make really lovely relationships in there, and quite a lot of times those people stay in touch after the fair. And I never expected that to happen. So that's just a lovely byproduct again of running those fairs and sort of bringing the handmade community together, really. And for me, it is just an amazing supportive community that I just absolutely love being part of.
Yeah, well, you must be, as you said, you're sharing your experiences of starting your own handmade business and growing it, and then what you've learned from the coaching. And it's certainly something that I think a lot of creatives that want to make their creative passion into something more than a hobby really need help with.
Yeah, because I was this person too. When I started out, I could make beautiful fairies. I didn't have a clue really about running an online business. And I suppose I loved the business side, and I just immersed myself in learning. I got the right support with a coach, and I've worked with various different coaches over the years. I've took courses, and sort of nearly 5 years down the line with my handmade business, I'm still all the time training and learning so that I can pass that on to my coaching clients, and then I share hints and tips on the Handmade Craft Fair page as well, because I want to help as many people as I can.
Oh, well done. That is so lovely to hear.
Oh, thank you.
Talking of tips, this brings in a subject that comes up a lot in the podcast generally with my other guests. Do you have any tips? You've said you like the business side, lots of arts and crafts, and makers are not mad keen on the business side. Do you have any tips on balancing the creative aspect of your business and the business side of the business?
So I would definitely say, you're not going to have one without the other. You can make the most beautiful items, but they're not just going to sell themselves without you doing anything. You have to be prepared to get yourself out there on social media, and there's lots of ways that you can grow a successful business, but you do have to be committed. So I would definitely suggest putting time aside every week to be making sure you've planned ahead on your social media. You need to be really active on that. I mean, Instagram is just an amazing platform to sell handmade. It's so visual. So for me, I would say having dedicated time, a little bit of time every day for social media, and then weekly time where you're thinking about doing other things, newsletters and Pinterest and, all the marketing stuff that's going to really help people get to know you and get yourself seen so much more.
It's all in the planning, hey, Lynsey?
Yeah, definitely.
Thank you. Tell me about your podcast.
I co-host a podcast with a lovely lady called Anna. She does planners, so she's Anna's Planners on Instagram. And basically, a lot of the episodes are all sharing really useful information, advice on how to run a handmade craft business. And then we also have some guests come along as well. So we interview makers, we have some expert interviews. So yeah, we try and do a little bit of mixture of things. Me and Anna we're quite different in some ways. Like she's very much more loves the business side and started a business and then became crafty, whereas I'd always been crafty and then started a business. We come at things sometimes from different perspectives, but it's in a really good way.
Oh, well, that sounds like a good mixture, a good meld to have those,
Yeah.
though both of those experiences and strong experiences. Brilliant. Thank you, Lynsey. How can people connect with you? That is Lynsey, the handmade business owner, and Lynsey, the handmade business coach.
So my handmade business is called Raindrop Crafts, and you can find me on Instagram, Facebook, and I also have my Etsy shop where I sell my fairies. My coaching, I have got a page for that on Instagram, which is called Lynsey Warren Coaching. So I've got that sort of dedicated Instagram page. And then I've also got the Handmade Craft Fair page. And if you want to find out any about those services, I've got my own website called lynseywarren.com where you can find out about the fairs, the coaching, and all the other ways that I can support you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Lynsey. It's been really lovely to talk to you today.
Oh, thank you so much, Claire. I've absolutely loved coming along and chatting to you about it all.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Creativity Found is an Open Stage Arts production. If you are listening on Apple Podcasts, please subscribe, rate and review. If you would like to contribute to future episodes, visit ko-fi.com/creativityfoundpodcast. If you contact any of the artists featured, sign up to their workshops or buy their products, don't forget to mention Creativity Found Podcast. On Instagram or Facebook, follow @Creativity Found Podcast, where you'll find photos of our contributors' artwork and be kept abreast of everything we're up to.